I've always been really interested in exploring these underdog technologies that outperform the existing status quo in certain areas, and outdoor raincoats is one of these areas. It's dominated by Gore-Tex products and other membrane-based raincoats. And there is this alternative technology, and I've actually been wearing these coats for 20 years, and they're still remarkably quite unknown. So the coats I'm talking about are made by a company called Paramo, and I think they are far superior to Gore-Tex products for keeping you dry and comfortable, and this is a crucial point, in wet weather. And that's really interesting because the industry at the moment uses this kind of ridiculous system for measuring waterproofness of coats called hydrostatic head. All they're doing is measuring the point at which water will go through the coat under pressure. This just doesn't represent real life use, and that's really obviously apparent as soon as you actually wear these things in the rain. So a membrane-based raincoat, like a Gore-Tex product, uses this membrane inside the fabric of the coat to block liquid water. It blocks liquid water no matter which way it's going. And that means it can't let sweat and condensation out in the same way that it can't let rain in. This fascinating underdog technology is called Analogy, and it's a fabric made by Nikwax, and you can get it in their branded Paramo coats as well as a few other brands that use this technology as well. So Analogy works completely differently to Gore-Tex. Instead of using a membrane to block liquid water in either direction, it actually has no membrane at all, and it will completely fail the hydrostatic head test. It will just score a flat 0. Water will be pushed through this fabric under any pressure at all. In spite of that, I think they keep you feeling drier and more comfortable in a wider range of situations than a Gore-Tex coat. The problems with Gore-Tex are really far-reaching and quite complex, but in a nutshell, you've got this fundamental physics problem of relative humidity. When it's raining, the air outside your coat is naturally, obviously, very humid. That means the air inside the coat can never be drier than the air outside the coat, because that's just not the way vapor transfer works. So the maximum dryness inside your coat is never going to be drier than outside your coat. And if it's raining, that really isn't very dry. And the problem is compounded by the effect of having to have face fabrics outside the membrane which can wet out, and then you end up with this kind of 100% humidity on the outside of the membrane scenario, which then means the air is drier on the inside. That anecdotally has the potential to then suck the vapor through the membrane, making the air more damp on the inside of the coat, which is of course exactly the opposite of what you want. So this wetting out problem, combined with the fundamental unsolvable problem of relative humidity each side of this membrane, I think kind of means this is the wrong approach to use when you're trying to make a waterproof coat. That's what's so fascinating about the Analogy fabric. They reject the idea of using a membrane completely, which of course immediately makes the coat super breathable. It's just fabric. There's no horrible tight plasticky membrane inside it. So how on earth does it keep you dry? And this is where it gets really fascinating. So it's designed to mimic animal fur in the way that it actively pushes liquid water away from your body. So what we know about relative humidity means we are going to have to live with this idea that we are in a humid environment. That means we are going to be dealing with sweat and condensation. There won't be any mechanism that this can leave your body through vapor alone because of this relative humidity problem. So given that baseline environment, I think the best thing that can happen is that we move the liquid water away from us so that we can feel comfortable and dry. That's what Analogy fabric does. It physically transports your liquid moisture from the inside of your coat towards the outside. So that mechanism by which it's moving your moisture away is also the same mechanism by which it keeps the rain moving outwards as well and prevents that ingress of water. So for Analogy coats to actually work, they do need to be regularly reproofed using this Nikwax product. So what that does, it's not actually creating a waterproof barrier in the same way that, say, a durable water repellent finish on a Gore-Tex coat does. It's actually there to make the individual fibers in the fabric hydrophobic, and that's what promotes that movement of liquid water through the fibers. So it works in an incredibly unique way. So because the fabric actually has no membrane, no actual barrier against liquid water, it will of course fail the hydrostatic head test that Gore-Tex coats use to measure their performance by. So instead of trying to compete in that space, Paramo coats measure their performance in a rain room. This is a sort of simulated process where they put the coat on a mannequin and then just spray it with water and then measure how much water has kind of gone through after a period of time. So all of these Nikwax Analogy fabrics pass 4 hours in this simulated rain room test, and the amount of rain they use in these tests is extreme. Now it is important to note that Nikwax did donate this rain room to Leeds University where it is, so we have to keep that in in mind, but obviously they're trying to compete in a space that's dominated by this test, which just isn't relevant for their approach to solving this problem. So I can kind of see where they've come from with this. But the proof is in the pudding. People that wear these coats really rate them, and I feel incredibly comfortable wearing them in the rain as well. So I think it is just one of these things where this more subjective idea of comfort in rain is actually better represented by a product like this. What's interesting about Paramo coats is how much more pleasant they are to wear, I think, than a Gore-Tex product. The best way of describing this, I think, is if you get caught out in the rain, you get kind of wet, your hair gets wet, and you want to put a coat on. If you're wearing a Gore-Tex coat, that is a really uncomfortable, horrible feeling. You know that all you're doing is sealing in that liquid and it can't go anywhere once you put the coat on. With a Paramo coat, it's like kind of wearing a towel. It feels like it's drying you, which of course it is. So it's no problem at all to put it on if you're already a bit wet. And I think that's one of the best ways of kind of describing what it feels like to wear one of these coats. And what's interesting in the UK is there seem to be a lot of mountain rescue teams that use Paramo coats as their outdoor clothing of choice. And I think that really says a lot about what they're like to use in extreme environments. And I'm not actually coming from this from a very extreme use case scenario. I'm looking for an everyday coat. I'm just super keen on exploring what the best technology for that role actually is. This particular coat that I'm looking at is the Hellkey by Paramo, and I think it's a really nice model for everyday use. One of the main issues with these kind of outdoor brands is they can look pretty weird in an everyday environment. And that is certainly true of a lot of the coats in the Paramo range. This seems to be the most approachable for an everyday sort of environment. And in terms of functionality and design, these things are fantastic. I love the fit. It's very unrestrictive in terms of movement. The hoods are amazing. They follow your head. You don't find yourself looking into the side of your hood when you change your head. There's plenty of movement in there, and they've got these lovely peaks as well. So if you've got glasses, keeps the rain off your glasses. Lots of really good design attention to detail in these coats. Now, I mentioned this waterproofing product, Nikwax, that is essential for an analogy fabric to actually work. And this is important because in the Gore-Tex world, we know these DWR products are really toxic. So it's important to keep an eye on what's going on here. Now, the Nikwax product is completely biodegradable and harmless. There's nothing like the kind of PFC toxic version that we see with Gore-Tex coats. So that's important to understand. And the other nice thing about Paramo is their ethics statement about the way these coats are produced. Again, we know with Gore-Tex, there are all kinds of nasty things going on with the factories and where they produce them. There's lawsuits about the pollution of the water supply and all of this kind of stuff. And with Paramo, first of all, there's no kind of dubious chemicals in the process. This is just fairly standard production of these materials. But they seem to have a really solid statement about their labor workforce as well, which is really good to see. I just want to briefly mention Gore-Tex Shake Dry as an interesting part of this discussion. So I mentioned the problems with DWR and the face fabric of normal Gore-Tex coats wetting out. Well, Gore-Tex have tried to solve this problem using Shake Dry, which is essentially the membrane as the outer fabric of the coat. So water just continually runs off that membrane, but of course there's nothing protecting that membrane. And ultimately I just felt that it was too delicate for a kind of everyday coat in the way that I needed. So I'm back to using Paramo as my everyday, but I do keep the Shake Dry as a kind of backup coat. If you want to see more on that Shake Dry coat, check out the review I've done on that, and I'll see you there.